The floor is all yours, Lori. Thank you so much.
Well, I had to unmute my mic. I do apologize. Give me a second here and I will share my screen. All right, you should be seeing. All right, are you seeing my screen there? Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you. And I did just drop in chat the URL. All right, so this will take you out to my E-rate resource page, where you'll see a PDF copy of today's presentation. As we conduct, more training throughout this E-rate season, you'll find, session handouts there. There are a number of documents, different things that I share throughout the year that you'll find out of this URL that hopefully you'll find helpful. But as Christine said, I'm Lori Gurman. I'm the state E-rate coordinator. I support both schools and libraries for our state. All right. Now, when I go through some of these slides, you'll see some information about schools, because some of this you need to understand, because some information from a school gets populated into the E-rate portal for the library or library system, such as that's how your discount rate is calculated. And I'll explain what all that means. All right. But you're going to see me reference, some school information as well. Okay, so a quick agenda here. Now, today's session, this is a beginner session. It may not feel like a beginner session because there's a lot of rules, a lot of information around E-rate. I'll try very hard not to get so deep into the weeds, but I am a weedy kind of person. All right, so let me know, if you need me to bring it back up a little bit. All right, but again, there is a lot of information to cover, even if this is for beginners. We will start with talking about E-rate, all right, an overview. What is E-rate? How does the funding work? We'll talk about, really important, what's eligible under E-rate, both the services as well as equipment. And then the all-important updates, all right? So things that things that are going to be coming along for this upcoming funding year that you need to be aware of. We will talk about Category 2 budgets, what that means, how that's calculated. Then we'll walk through the application process, all right, because there are multiple E-rate forms, that you file throughout the funding year. So you need to understand, the purpose of the form. When do we file this? All right, how does all of this work? And then the last few minutes this afternoon, we will take a quick look at the E-rate Productivity Center, all right? We refer to that as EPIC, all right? This is where we'll do all of our E-rate work. But there are a couple of things in there I really want to show you, some information you need to make sure that's, current, but then the portal. Now, as we go through this, again, please, don't hesitate to ask questions. I prefer to get the question, while, we're talking about that subject, and feel free to unmute if that's easier to ask the question, verbally versus putting it in the chat. Either will work. Okay, so first off, what is E-rate? Well, this is a federal program, but know that this does not come out of the federal budget. This does fund annually. Right now, it's at $3.9 billion. Now, we all pay into the fund, all right, that basically funds E-rate. It's called the Universal Service Fund. Every phone bill in the nation, all right, if you look closely at your phone bill, you'll see something called the Universal Service Fund or Universal Service Fee. All right, so that's something that is collected, and it actually funds 4 different programs, E-rate simply being one of the 4. It does cover a portion of the cost. The portion runs anywhere from 20 to 90%. All right, this is considered a discount program. All right, it's not a grant, but the discount portion it will cover goes anywhere from 20 to 90% of the eligible equipment or services. Now, a couple of principles to be aware of. Basically, pretty much every service or equipment that you're looking for has to go through a competitive bidding process. There are a couple of exceptions we'll talk about, all right, but you have to go through the bidding process. You have to use the E-rate portal to do this. And when we go out to bid, those bids have to be out there for a minimum of 28 days. That's the E-rate cardinal rule. All right, so pretty much anything, like I said, with just a couple of small exceptions, all right, has to be competitively bid. Okay, now you also have to show that you pay your, what we call your non-discount portion. So I mentioned E-rate covers 20 to 90% of the cost. Well, let's say your discount rate is 80%. Then you have to be prepared to show you paid your 20, you know, at the very least you paid your 20%. All right, so again, that's one of those other rules to be mindful of. Now, this program, the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, they're the folks that set all the rules and policies. All right. And then they have contracted with a company, a nonprofit company called USAC, USAC, the Universal Service Administrative Company. They're the ones who manage the program, the application process on a day-to-day basis. So for most of us, we interact with USAC. All right, very rarely. A state coordinator, you know, on occasion I interface with the FCC. Most of the time it's with USAC. Now, you know, we're starting this process now. Here we are in the September. Everything we're talking about today would be for services that you're going to be applying for the next funding year. All right, so we start this process typically 6 to 9 months before the next funding year is to start. All right, so months in advance. And as we go through all of these various forms, you'll notice it's very deadline driven. All right, lots of deadlines to be aware of. Now, with the funding year, I've mentioned, all right, funding year. When you see FY, like FY 2024, that does not mean fiscal year, it means funding year. And this can be a little confusing. All right, so the funding year, we term that based on when the services will typically start. So we are currently under funding year 2024. All right, it may be fiscal year 2025, right? But for E-rate purposes, it's funding year 2024. So that simply means that those were services that started July 1, 2024, and will go through June 30th, 2025. And now we're preparing to file for FY 2025, meaning services that will begin July 1, 2025 through June 30th, 2026. So like I said, that can be a little confusing. Now, as far as delivery and installation of services, you'll hear us refer to recurring services versus non-recurring. So recurring services, these are the things that you receive on a monthly basis, all right? Like your internet access, your bandwidth, all right? So, you know, say you pay your provider, your service provider, say whether that's Spectrum, AT&T, whoever, all right? You know, T-Mobile, whoever that vendor is, you pay for that service on a monthly basis. All right, that's what we refer to as recurring service. Non-recurring is, you know, let's say you're purchasing equipment, access points, and you're asking E-rate to cover the installation of those access points. That's a one-time purchase during the funding year typically. All right, so we refer to that as non-recurring. Now, something else to be aware of, you know, we talk about the funding year going from July 1 through June 30th. Keep in mind that if you're going to apply for, you know, E-rate to cover the eligible equipment, all right, and we'll talk about, you know, what equipment is eligible. With that equipment, we are allowed to start purchasing as early as 90 days before the start of that funding year, all right, so as early as April 1st. So 90 days, you know, right, leading up to the funding year. We also get 90 days on the back end of the funding year to get the equipment purchased and installed. All right, so when you're looking at purchasing equipment, that means we technically have 18 months to get that equipment purchased, you know, and get the installation complete. So if you are looking at, say, a construction project, you want to look at, you know, will you need that equipment anytime between April 1st, 2025 through June 30th, all right, 2026. Again, 18 months. So again, you know, will you need, you know, new network drops? Will you need access points or switches during that 18-month period? And if so, then you want to plan on applying for that for this upcoming funding year, right? If it falls within that 18-month period. Now, as far as who is eligible, now E-rate is also known as the Schools and Libraries Program. All right, so that should give you a big hint. It funds schools and libraries, all right, nationwide. Now, to qualify, you know, as a library, you have to be eligible for LSTA funding. Now, this also covers, you know, in addition to all of your branch locations, if you have a bookmobile where you need a hotspot, all right, to provide, basically to conduct library services. If you have a kiosk, all right, as long as those are eligible under LSTA, all right, then that's an eligible location, all right, that would be eligible for E-rate. Okay, and of course, all of our public and private schools are also eligible. Now, you'll also hear us talk about MIBS. We see this more on the school side, but on occasion, libraries will have these non-instructional facilities. This would be, say, a separate data center, or maybe it's an admin building that serves the library system where it's not open to patrons, all right, where maybe it's just offices. All right, so those buildings, we still refer to it as a non-instructional facility. All right, they are eligible for E-rate, but they're only eligible for broadband or internet access. All right, you cannot use E-rate to buy equipment like switches and access points to serve that building. Okay, so again, just an important distinction there. Now, with the E-rate system, we do have some basically a numbering scheme here. Now, every what we call parent organization, so that would be, say, a library system, all right, you have what's called a BIN, a build entity number. Now, if you're an independent library, you'll still have a BIN, but you'll only have that one number, all right? But in this case, the BIN, that is indicating who's paying the bills, all right? So if it's a library system, the library system is paying the bills for all of its branch locations. Okay, so that's how we distinguish this build entity number, who's paying the bills. Now, every branch location, if you do have that separate admin building, then each of those locations, if you're asking for E-rate for any of those locations, then they need to be reflected in the E-rate portal. All right, and they will have what's called a child entity number. So it's a parent-child relationship. All right, so at the very least, you're going to have the build entity number, and then every other location, like I said, branch locations, if it's a separate admin building, a bookmobile, all right, those will each have its own assigned child entity number. Now, when you're looking in the portal, if you see that maybe you have a new branch and that branch is not reflected, under your, within the portal, then you would need to reach out to USAC to request a new entity number. Again, it's very important because when the reviewers are looking at your application, they're going to look at, okay, who's receiving service and are they listed in the portal? Now, I've mentioned this portal. This is where we do all of our E-rate work. All right, all of the forms are listed there. This is where you would go in if you need to create a new user account. Square footage, we're going to talk about why it's very important, and when you need to basically record your square footage for each branch location and how that portal will use those numbers. All right, so again, we do that within the EPIC portal. Now, with the portal, each build entity has to have at least one user, all right? Oddly enough, that user is basically assigned as an account administrator. All right, now the account administrator, it's that user account that can create other user accounts. All right, so every build entity within the system, all right, has an assigned account administrator. Okay, now if it's a library, in some cases, some carryover, this portal became into being in 2016. There were some libraries at the time that were not applying for E-rate on their own, since Oakland was applying for providing the circuit to your building. So in some rare occasions, there may not be an individual listed as an admin. We need to contact USAC, all right, and get that admin added. All right, again, don't want to get too far into the weeds, but again, we have to have at least the one admin associated. But like I said, the admin, that's the individual that has the rights to go in and create other user accounts. So the discount rate, how do you determine what percentage, all right, will E-rate cover? Well, if you're an independent library, then it's based on the percentage of students at the district located, within the same area as that independent library. Basically, there is a connection in the portal between that library location and the district that you serve. And when that district personnel go in and they update their student enrollment information and how many students qualify for the National School Lunch Program, that information basically bleeds into your portal account. All right, that auto populates, I should say, all right, under your portal. All right, so again, if it's an independent library, wherever that library is located, the school district in the same location, all right, it's based on that district's information. If you're with a library system, then it's wherever the main library, doesn't matter where your other branches are located, maybe, throughout the county, it's wherever the main library is located, then it's tied to the school district in the same location as the main branch. All right. So again, it's going to depend on what percentage of the students qualify for the National School Lunch Program. And then also, if you've got multiple branches listed, the system looks at the zip code for each of those branches. And then it's based on census data. Are you in an urban or rural location? All right. And whichever is the majority. Okay, that's the one that we go by, whichever is the majority. So this is where that information comes into play. So we use this discount matrix, and we've used this. E-rate started in 1998. This matrix really hasn't changed very much. All right, so let's say the school district that you serve, all right, let's say 29% of their students qualify for the lunch program. All right, so you just look to see where does that fall on this matrix. So we can see that it would fall under the 50% discount rate if you're urban, all right, 60% if you're rural. Now, you will notice until we hit 80%, rural locations do get a higher discount rate. It costs more to get, bandwidth, internet access to the rural locations, all right? So you get a little extra funding. Once we hit 80%, it's the same across the board. The only other difference here I want to point out is if you're at the highest discount rate, all right, meaning that 75% or more of the students qualify for the lunch program, then you're at a 90% discount rate for what we call Category 1, and I'll explain the differences here shortly. But you'll be at a 90% discount rate for Category 1, but 85% for Category 2. That's the only difference between Cat 1 and Cat 2. All right, once you hit 80%, or below that, it's the same for both Cat 1 and Cat 2. All right, so again, this is how we determine those discount rates. So let's talk about eligible services. So I've mentioned this Cat 1, Cat 2. All right, so what is that? So Category 1, the best way to, explain this is Category 1 means services to the library. All right, so your data transmission service, the fiber connection coming into those buildings, or fiber that's, say, connecting your buildings. All right, so it's the data transmission service and internet access. All right, and as we just saw, the max discount rate is 90%. Now, with Category 1, there are no funding caps. All right, it's, the cost is whatever it is. It has to be reasonable. Service providers are not allowed to say, oh, this library is receiving E-rate, we're going to charge them more than we would, say, local businesses in town, all right, because E-rate's going to cover part of the cost. That's majorly against the rules, all right? So again, there are no funding caps as long as it's considered reasonable. And again, internet bandwidth, those are considered those recurring services. So anything you're applying for this upcoming year would be for those services July 1 through June 30th. All right, now, and also remember, all buildings are eligible under Category 1. So if you do have that non-instructional facility, that separate admin building, all right, they qualify, all right, Category 1 services, not a problem. Category 2, this is services or equipment that go inside the library, all right, within the four walls. So here we do have some subcategories. First, we have what's called internal connections. That's the equipment. All right. And then basic maintenance of internal connections, just what that means, basic maintenance for, things like switches and access points. The third subcategory is called MIBS. That's managed internal broadband service. If you're paying a third-party company to manage your Wi-Fi, all right, that fits under Category 2. Now, again, looking back at that discount matrix, right, the max that E-rate will cover for Category 2 is 85%, all right, for any of those three subcategories. Now, where Cat 1, there is no budget. Cat 2, there is a budget, and we'll talk about how that's calculated. All right, so there is a funding cap for that. It is fairly generous. I've seen very few libraries, max out their Cat 2 budget. I mean, it can happen, all right, but there is a funding cap. Now, you're going to hear me mention this several times. So remember, with the equipment, that means, equipment that you receive, with this upcoming funding year, anytime between that April 1, 2025, September 30th, 2026 timeframe. Now, again, really stressing this, if you've got that non-instructional facility, you cannot use E-rate funding, all right, to purchase Cat 2 equipment, such as access points for those facilities. All right, so let's look a little bit deeper here. What's eligible under Category 1? All right, and Christine, please let me know if the pace is okay. If I need to slow it down, please let me know that.
I think we're doing okay.
Okay.
No questions so far.
Perfect. Right, thank you. Okay, so when we talk about Category 1, I mentioned data transmission service. So again, most common, least lit fiber. You can also have, say, a cable modem, like a DSL service. You can also have that bundle, like most DSL services, you're getting both bandwidth and internet access. All right, so those are the most common. There are some other, options here, what we call dark fiber. That's where somebody else owns the fiber, but you're paying to light it. Or self-provision. I don't see many libraries doing self-provision. I see more schools doing this, but this would be where you're actually paying to lay fiber to connect, say, 2 library branches. All right. Again, that is eligible. Don't see many libraries making use of that. Now, if you are installing fiber, even if it's, say, that least lit fiber, if your service provider says, okay, we can get, least lit fiber out to this branch, but we're going to have to charge you $5,000 for the installation is also eligible, okay, at whatever your discount rate is. So again, those installation costs are covered. All right, so again, you can see some of the other options here. Now, you will notice it's the last bulleted item under also eligible, where it says wireless data plans. These are typically used for bookmobiles. Those type of hotspots used specifically, say, for a kiosk or a bookmobile, those have been eligible under E-rate for some time. All right, because again, you have to have that internet access to conduct the library business, right? So hotspots have been eligible for some time, but only for bookmobiles or a kiosk, all right? So we will talk about some changes this year, so don't confuse the two. Now, I do want to point out some things that are not eligible, voice service. So anything under E-rate, if it's going to provide a dial tone, it is not eligible, all right? Another thing, in fact, right before the training this afternoon, I received a phone call from a school district asking about redundancy, okay? E-rate will not pay for a redundant internet, or bandwidth circuit, all right? Yes, you may need that redundant, that backup circuit, but E-rate's not going to cover it, all right? Will not cover redundancy. Also, filtering. We're going to talk a little bit about SEPA compliance, all right? The Children's Internet Protection Act, where, to be SEPA compliant, you have to filter, with the filtering, again, it's filtering for the biggies, the pornography, obscene depictions, okay? While it's a requirement to get some levels of funding, all right, meaning that you have to filter, E-rate will not cover the filtering. That's been since the beginning of the program. Sorry, I went a little backwards there. Now, I did mention that like a DSL circuit is eligible. I do want to make you aware, I talked about, the bidding requirement, that there's, maybe there are a couple of exceptions. This is the first exception. So if you are using, say, like a DSL circuit, all right, DSL service, something that is commercially available. You could go to your local, internet provider, your local ISP. It's the same thing that's available for any business in town. All right. So if you're using that type service, okay, that type service, you may not have to go out to bid for this. All right. So as long as the minimum speeds are 100 megs downstream, okay, by 10 megs upstream. So 100 meg by 10 as a minimum, all right, if you've got that minimum bandwidth. And then the annual cost per location, and this is before any discounts are applied, all right? So per branch location, if that annual cost does not exceed $3,600, then the FCC has said this is already considered cost effective. So you don't have to jump through the hoops and go out to bid for this. So if you've got that DSL, that's say $100 a month, and it's at the very least 100 by 10, you don't have to go out to bid. You could go straight to basically the second form in the application process we'll talk about. All right. So again, this has been quite a help, all right, for a lot of our small libraries. Okay, so again, just keep that in mind. And let me know if there's any questions here. But we refer to this as a CABIO, commercially available bundled internet option. All right, so that's what's eligible under category 1. Let's talk about category 2. Now, I've already mentioned that there are 3 subcategories: the internal connections, basic maintenance, and MIBS. Keep in mind, if you're going to apply for anything under category 2, this is where that SEPA requirement comes in. All right, you have to be SEPA compliant to qualify for category 2 funding. But again, to be SEPA compliant, it's basically filtering for pornographic content. So go back and look, or is that something that you're already doing? So what's eligible under internal connections? Well, I've mentioned switches and access points. All right, well, this also includes wireless controllers, routers. If you need, I mentioned network drops, maybe you need to run some Ethernet drops through your building, either to replace something that's already there, or you're adding some additional access points, so you need to run some new Ethernet drops to those access points. So E-rate would cover, up to your discount rate, the cost of the material, the labor, all right, all of that is eligible. Caching servers are also eligible. This is, unfortunately, that's the only server, all right, that E-rate will fund is a caching server. So if you have a general file server that you need to replace, E-rate's not going to cover that. Firewall appliances are also eligible, but as it stands right now, only basic firewalls are currently eligible under E-rate. All right, but if you are looking at a new firewall appliance, all right, E-rate may cover at least a portion of it, depending on the how robust that appliance is. If you need to install some new racks, all right, to basically put those switches or routers into, it'll cover the cost of the rack, as well as a UPS to plug the router or the switches into. If you're asking for, let's say you're going with Meraki APs, all right, and those require a license, any equipment license, again, would be eligible. You can even ask for multi-year upfront. So you could ask for, say, a 3-year or 5-year license. All right, again, that would be eligible as long as it's what we call a right to use license, all right, that would be eligible. And Mark, I'm looking at your question. Mark, I'll have to go back. I know the caching part. DNS is eligible under, if that's part of your service, with Cat 1. I'm not sure on the DNS under Cat 2. My knee jerk is to say yes. All right, but if you are looking at a caching server, if the let's say the reviewer comes back and says, okay, the DNS portion's not eligible, then they'll do what's called a cost allocation. All right, it'll be what portion of this server is going to be used, say for DNS versus caching. So if you said, well, 10% is going to be used for DNS, and they would say 10% of that caching server is considered ineligible. All right, but I'll get clarification on that. All right, but I do know DNS, if that's part of your service under Cat 1, I know it's eligible there. All right, but I'll get clarification on that. All right, but thank you for the question. Now, if you are looking at cloud-based functionality, such as caching, it could be a firewall service, all right, again, the caching that cloud service would be eligible. Software needed, all right. Now, again, important distinction here. If it's software needed in order for that piece of equipment to operate, okay, it's an operating system, then that would be eligible. If it's a piece of software that's going to sit on top of that machine, say to help you monitor, all right, it's going to add some additional functionality, E-rate would not cover that, all right, but it will cover the operating system. Okay, same thing with basic training on the use of the equipment. They're not going to train, say, your staff, all right, say in, I can't come up with a good example here. It really is covering just your IT staff. How do we operate that piece of equipment? Not some additional training, say to, further functions of that equipment. Now, non-eligible. I've got the first one listed here, underlined with exclamation points, cybersecurity. All right, E-rate does not cover cybersecurity. Now, you may be hearing a lot about E-rate and cybersecurity right now because the FCC does have out this application process. They're looking at a 3-year cybersecurity pilot where it's going to be done outside of the E-rate funds. All right, it's a set aside of it's $200 million to cover this pilot. All right, so it would take a separate application process, getting chosen for the pilot. All right, but as it stands right now, cybersecurity not eligible under our typical E-rate. All right, so again, I wanted to put that there. End user devices. So if you look, if you're looking at buying some laptops, some tablets, all right, E-rate does not cover end user or security cameras. And I mentioned that it does cover basic firewall, but not advanced features. Yeah, this is definitely getting into the weeds. Sometimes you'll have a piece of equipment that might include some ineligible functionality, like an advanced firewall. All right. Well, it's like, how do I know for this particular device? Is it fully eligible? Is there some, ineligible functionality rolled in? Most of the manufacturers do have websites out there that you can go and look the information up. And, within the presentation today, you can go to those URLs. Cisco Meraki has a great site. All right. But again, I strongly suggest if you're looking at a piece of equipment, go out and verify, is this piece of equipment fully eligible? If you cannot find the information, say from the manufacturer's site, you can call USAC's help desk and they have all of this information. All right, because the manufacturers have to report to USAC, all right, what's eligible, what's ineligible, within a particular part number. Let me know if you have questions there. Now, we've already talked about this. I'm not going to spend a lot more time here. Remember, you've got those 18 months, all right, if you're looking at buying, anything under internal connections, all right, any of that equipment, network cables, and so on. Now, I do want to point out one thing here. So, yeah, you could start buying this, getting it installed as early as April 1st. Just keep in mind that, let's say you go ahead, say in June, and pay the invoice. We cannot file for reimbursement until July 1, all right, providing you've already received your funding letter. All right, so again, you can start the process early, but you have to wait until the July 1 to start the process, all right, to get reimbursed. Like I said, if you've already received the funding letter. Okay, basic maintenance. I do want to cover this briefly. It really is just basic, what's classified as basic maintenance. All right, so this is the type of maintenance where it's going to cover things like bug fixes, patches. There's an 800 number that you can call for help. All right, that's what's classified as basic maintenance. All right, just that, like I said, that tech support configuration changes. Anything outside of that, basic maintenance is pretty hard to get reimbursed on. Some of my colleagues in other state coordinators, basically suggest don't waste your Cat 2 money on basic maintenance. All right, because it has become very problematic. A lot of basic maintenance contracts, have you go ahead and pay, let's say for maybe it's a 3-year contract. They will have you oftentimes pay all 3 years up front. But if you do that, E-rate, if it really is even basic maintenance, will only reimburse you for 1 year's cost annually. All right. It's not like license where you can pay, say, for a 3-year, 5-year license subscription and go ahead and get reimbursed up front. If it's a maintenance contract, all right, you can only ask for 1 year's cost each funding year. And even if you get that equipment, let's say in April, you make use of that extra 18, that 18-month period, basic maintenance is only going to cover from July 1 through June 30th. Now, something else just to be aware of, I've talked about how license, right to use license are eligible under internal connections. All right, so let's say you're buying some new access points and there's a license that you need to purchase for those. All right, that fits under internal connections. However, if let's say you go to purchase the renewal license, all right, let's say after 3 years, okay, we need to renew those license. Typically, the manufacturer has rolled in some level of maintenance. And right now, this has caused some problems, all right, when it has that mixed functionality. And again, I know this is really in the weeds, but what USAC is recommending, and this is new information that we just received from USAC, they're recommending that you reach out to the manufacturer or call the USAC help desk and say, okay, we're looking at this license renewal. Tell us what the split is. All right, so what portion of this cost is for the actual right to use license portion versus what portion is covering maintenance. All right, and then you split that into 2 different funding requests. You'll understand more about that later in the year when we start filing. All right, when we start doing training for the next form in the process. Okay, the 471. All right, but just know that you do have the ability, if you're looking at a renewal license, to split the cost to make sure it's listed under the correct subcategory. All right, so then the third service category is MIBS, that managed internal broadband service. So this is where you're contracting, say, with a third-party company. This cannot be used to pay for your internal staff. All right, this is where you're paying a company, all right, to do that day-to-day management monitoring of your Wi-Fi, all right, of the network. Okay, so again, this would be eligible. Now, this is subject to that Cat 2 budget. All right, I've seen this used a lot by small school districts, as well as smaller libraries systems. Now, here's the second bidding exemption. So we have the one bidding exemption, the CABIO, all right, under Category 1. Under Category 2, this just began with this current funding year. So this is still, pretty new. But if you're looking for Category 2 equipment or services, right, under any of those 3 subcategories, if the total pre-discount amount is $3,600 or less, you don't have to go out to bid for it. So if you're looking at, say, adding just a couple of APs, all right, and the cost is, $3,600 or less, you don't have to go out to bid, all right? So you get a pass on that bidding form, and you can go straight to the 471 application, all right, and say, hey, we want E-rate to cover this equipment, all right? So again, that is that second bidding exemption. Yeah, a few things to know about, this equipment that you've purchased, all right, or if you plan on purchasing. When you receive the equipment, you want to make sure, that you tag it, that that this is equipment that we're purchasing with E-rate funding. Because if you ever got audited, you'd have to be able to show an auditor, all right? Here's the equipment that we asked E-rate to cover. Yes, we did purchase, what we said we were going to purchase, all right? So make sure that everything's tagged. Now, the E-rate rule does allow us, let's say you buy some access points for, say for, one library branch, and then you decide, okay, I asked for, 10 UAPs for that branch, but realized I really only needed 7 for that location. You could transfer 3 of those, say, to another branch location. All right, you don't have to let USAC know that you've moved the equipment around. Just keep track of it in your, in your inventory. again, so if you were to get audited, you know exactly where that equipment is sitting, where is it installed. All right. Now, as far as disposal, if you're asking for E-rate to cover the cost of a piece of equipment, okay, after 5 years, you can dispose of it. All right. So basically you have to, keep that equipment. And if it dies, just make a note. Let's say it, something happens to it in year 3, you make a note in your inventory. This is what's happened to this piece of equipment. Okay. But after 5 years, then you're allowed to dispose of that equipment. Yeah. Make note here. It says asset inventory must be retained for 10 years. All right. So yeah, there's the E-rate rule that we have this document retention, 10 years. Any documents relating to your application process, bids or anything like that, we have to keep them for 10 years. All right, we've talked about, the NIFs not being eligible, all right, those non-instructional facilities. Keep in mind, though, that let's say you have a separate data center, all right, obviously where, equipment, basically all of your branches are connecting back, say, to that data center. All right, then you could buy, say, that wireless controller or that router. You can buy that out of Cat 2 that's going to serve those branches and physically install it within that data center. All right, that piece is allowed. As long as it's not, bought like an access point where it's purchased specifically for that building. Okay, so let's talk about what's new for 2025, because this is a biggie, especially for our libraries. So this just came about in July. Now, I'm going to share with you pretty much what we know today. Just a heads up, though, the FCC, they have out what we call an NPRM, a Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. So this is how the FCC comes up with policies and rules. All right, they put these notices out there. So they've asked a series of questions, some additional questions about hotspots for patrons, as far as, how do we, track this information? So some of the rules around this haven't been decided yet. Okay, so just giving you a heads up there. Once that NPRM is acted on, then we'll do some additional training, all around the rules, right? But right now, like I said, we don't have all of the information on the hotspots. But this is what we know right now. So it was during the board meeting in mid-July, hotspots, all right, wireless internet access for off-premise use. This is big because E-rate has never covered off-premise access before. This is now eligible under the E-rate program. Okay, so this will allow the libraries to do a Wi-Fi hotspot lending program. All right, that you can, for staff, library patrons. All right, so now this is eligible under E-rate. Now, a lot of you, I know, took advantage of ECF, the Emergency Connectivity Fund. So this is basically filling in the gap. All right, that's the intent, since ECF ended on June 30th. Keep in mind, though, anything that you're going to do, if you decide you're going to apply for these hotspots, it's for services beginning July 1. I've heard from a lot of libraries saying, oh, this would be great. Can I go ahead and start this now since ECF has gone away? Okay, no, you have to wait. This is for services beginning July 1, 2025. All right, I want to make that, perfectly clear. Okay, so with this, though, there are some funding caps. We'll talk about how that's determined. Okay, so there's some budgets you need to be aware of. And you're going to hear me say this a lot. The budgets that we'll be talking about will be a 3-year budget. Okay, so again, this is all new. Now, the last bullet, I've got it here in bold. All right. When we talk about SEPA requirements, SEPA is required, anything under category 2. However, with the hotspot lending under E-rate, you're not required to filter if that hotspot is providing access, say, on a patron's own laptop. All right.
Particular barcode. I'm right at the front of Collection HQ. And it said scanned in a barcode. And I hit scan a barcode. And it is a barcode that it
Sorry, I think I got muted there also.
So-
All right.
Sorry, Lori,
It's
sorry.
okay. Yeah, so as long as, you know, say the patron is using their patron or staff, if they're using their own, you know, laptop, tablet, all right, and then using your hotspot for access, then you do not have to filter. Okay, it comes down to who owns the end user device, the laptop, all right, or the tablet. All right, so outside of that, basically, filtering is not required. But please let me know if you have questions about that. So again, this is for off-premise use. So the budget, it's this really strange formula, okay? So it is a 3-year budget. This is going to be considered category 1, all right? So the cost for the hotspot devices, those will come out of category 1. They do not touch your category 2 budget at all, all right? So they will allow you during that 3-year period, you know, per hotspot device, up to $90 to pay for that device. And then a monthly recurring cost up to $15 per month per device. Now, we'll also talk about 45% annual limit. So it's a 3-year budget, but in any 1 year, you cannot ask for more than 45% of your budget. So that would allow you, let's say in year 1, if you needed to buy, let's say you're looking at 100 hotspots and you need to buy, you know, those 100 devices. So that way you could go ahead and, you know, possibly buy all of those devices in year 1. Okay, so again, this is what we know to date. All right, now it's going to be subject to all the E-rate rules and requirements, including competitive bidding, cost allocation, okay, and the discounting rules. So they're going to cover up to $15 per month. That's what we call a pre-discount amount. And then let's say you're at an 80% discount rate, then that's going to get applied. All right. Now, something else here, because I just mentioned ECF, the Emergency Connectivity Fund. So if you entered into a multi-year agreement for hotspots under ECF, all right, you're not exempt from the bidding requirement. So even if you're in a, you know, say a 3-year contract that's going to cover this upcoming funding year, you're going to have to go out to bid. All right, you're going to have to file the E-rate bidding form, the Form 470. All right, and go back out to bid for that. Okay, so again, all the E-rate rules apply here. So this formula, I know the gentleman who came up with this formula, and we're like, what were you thinking? When he suggested this to the FCC, he never expected them to use it verbatim, all right? But the FCC did, because apparently they liked it a lot. So this is the formula. We take, oh, I'm sorry, was there a question here?
There is a question. If a patron checks out a hotspot, how will we know what the end device would be? It's possible they could use it on a school-owned laptop since they take it home and we wouldn't know.
That's a good point, but it comes down to the libraries paying for the hotspot. You as the library don't own that device. So that would not be an issue. Does that make sense? Yeah, because I mean, there's no way for you to know, but bottom line, you're not funding that. You're not paying for that laptop.
Yeah, so it has to be library internet access on a library device for us
Correct.
to have the requirement for SEPA.
Correct. That's our understanding. And most schools, if the school is handing out those laptops or those tablets, then the school would be imposed, since the school owns that laptop, then the school is responsible for doing the filtering. It comes down to who owns the laptop. All right, but excellent question. All right, so this formula, it's the square footage, okay, times 5.5 hotspots for every 1,000 square feet, times your discount rate, times $630. And we'll talk about how that $630, all right, has been calculated. But that's how we come up with this 3-year budget. All right, so let's say you're at 10,000 square feet, and this is the cumulative total of square footage for all of your branches combined. All right, so let's say you're at 10,000 square feet, and you're at a 90% discount rate. It does some rounding, which is kind of wonky, okay, in my opinion, but it comes out to about $31,500. Now, and Christine, in the comments, you talked about posting hotspot budgets. I have also, if you want to use it, all right, this is out on my resource page. All right, I've put basically, there's a version out there for the libraries and then another one for schools, because schools are calculated a little bit differently. Okay, but I do have this spreadsheet out there, all right, that you can pull down. Some of the fields are locked, but I can come in here and I can say, okay, my square footage combined is 32,800 square feet. And let's say I'm at an 80% discount rate. Okay, so then this $630, that's $15 per month times 36 months plus $90, all right, for the device. So $15 times 36 months plus the $90, that's how we come up with the $630, all right? So that's the 3-year budget per hotspot. All right, so then we look at, basically looking at the formulas here, all right, that basically means that your budget would cover up to 144 hotspots. All right, so at that amount, then that would give you about, just under, right around $91,000. All right, so that breaks down to just a little under 78,000 for the monthly recurring service, and up to about 13,000 for the devices themselves. All right, so again, this document is out there. You'll see it under the resource page. Let me see if I can jump over there real quick. All right, so this is my resource page. And I'm going to put this in the chat again. All right, so when you go to this resource page, first you're going to see cybersecurity pilot things I have out there. But if you scroll down, all right, this is where you're going to see today's presentation. All right, and then right below that, you'll see the hotspot, the budget calculation tool. All right, so again, it's out there if you want to try using it. All right, so again, it's a 3-year fixed budget, okay? And this represents the maximum pre-discount amount that E-rate will cover over that 3-year period. Now, I did mention that you basically make that you cannot request more than 45%. So if you go back and you look at that budget, let's say it's $90,000, that in any 1 year, you cannot ask for more than 45%, whatever that budget level is. Okay, so a couple more rules here, all right? So we talked about the $15 per month times 36 months. Taxes are not included in that capped amount. All right, so if there's, some tax, if there's, say, a USF, Universal Service Fund, if there are any taxes on there, state, local, all right, that is not included, all right, in that cap. Now, if there is an activation or configuration cost, that is part of your cap, all right? Now, we talk about this is $15 that E-rate will cover up to $15 per month, in the times your discount rate. If you go with a service plan, let's say the monthly recurring cost is $25, then E-rate's going to cover basically the first 15. All right, anything over that's going to be out of pocket. All right, let me know if there are any questions to that. Like I said, a lot of numbers flying around here. So as far as eligibility, this is a hotspot, basically where this is its sole function. All right, so when we ask for, if you are asking for those hotspot devices, we will request that under category 1 on the bidding form, as well as when we get to the next form in the process, the 471. All right, those devices, like I said, comes out of Cat 1, does not touch Cat 2 budgets at all. Now, the last bullet here, again, these slides are from USAC. That right now they have no idea what the demand is going to be. They've estimated based on how many hotspots were requested for both schools and libraries during ECF to come up with a reasonable, count of what they can expect. But if something happens where, the regular category 1 and category 2 request, remember E-rates, the cap is $3.9 billion. Okay, so if there's not enough in the fund, to cover our regular Cat 1, Cat 2 things and the hotspots, the regular Cat 1, Cat 2 things get funded first. Now, what they typically have done in the past when this has happened, it's basically whoever is at the highest discount rate, they get funded first, and then they start working backwards until they run out of funds. So first year, we don't know what this is going to look like. We fully expect everybody to get, fully funded. All right. We'll see what happens at the, after the application period. So a couple more things to be aware of, as far as being eligible. It's a single device, portable. And the reason USAC is stating it this way, basically you cannot, under ECF, you could get coverage, you could pay for, say, a DSL connection to a home, all right? So that is not eligible under E-rate. That's why they're making this distinction. It has to be internet access that's being, provided via that hotspot device, all right? So just, again, just to expand on that, so, where ECF covered things like, tablets or laptops, all right, this is not going to be covered under E-rate. E-rate will not cover those end user devices. Okay. Also, it will not fund, let's say, a tablet that has LTE, the cellular signal built into that laptop or that say Chromebook. All right. It has to be that, that dedicated hotspot device. They also will not fund what we call a one-to-one initiative. All right. If you know that, okay, we have, let's say, 10,000 patrons. So I want to ask for 10,000 hotspots. Well, the budget's going to keep you from doing that anyway, right? Because it's going to limit, it's 5.5 hotspots for every 1,000, square feet that you have. Yeah. A couple more rules here, just to be aware. Now, you cannot ask for extra hotspots that are going to be warehoused. Say to be used for future. I mean, it's reasonable that you might have a hotspot sitting there, waiting for a patron to check it out. But it cannot be purchased, say, well, we're going to hold on to this hotspot in case, a hotspot dies, all right, or to have some spare parts, all right. So again, it cannot be, for future use, all right. Again, it is reasonable for a short period of time that it's sitting there waiting for the next patron to come and check it out. All right, any questions on the hotspots? Okay, so like I said, we'll schedule some additional sessions once that NPRM, once that, all of that is finalized. Okay, let's talk about Cat 2 budgets. All right, so we've talked about the budget for the Wi-Fi. All right, so category 2, I mentioned that this does have a fixed budget. Now, it's a 5-year budget cycle. So very important, if you're brand new, coming into this upcoming funding year, 2025, is year 5 of this current 5-year cycle. All right, so what that means is if you have any monies left in that Cat 2 budget and you're SEPA compliant and you say, yeah, I'm going to apply for this. All right, any monies that you leave in that budget come June 30th of 2026, that's going to get zeroed out. All right, it's a use it or lose it. That's going to get zeroed out. All right, but come July 1, 2026, then you're going to get a new 5-year budget allocation. All right, so again, the funds will not roll over. If you don't use all of your Cat 2 funds, it's not going to roll over to the next 5 years. All right, all of that will reset with funding year 2026. Now, if you're a library system, the Cat 2 budget is calculated at the library system level. So again, it's going to look at the total square footage of all your branches. Let's say that is 30,000 square feet. All right. And then we multiply that total square footage by $4.50. That's how a library's budget is determined. All right. Now, if you do have a small library, it's basically if it's less than 5,556 square feet, all right, then you get the benefit of what we call the funding floor, all right, $25,000. Okay, so again, if you are at that small library location, all right, below that, that threshold, all right, you do get the benefit of a $25,000 budget. Now, something else to be aware of, all right? So this is a provision for basically small schools or small library systems, all right? So my example here, Central, we can see that the main location, East Branch, North Branch, all right, they're all above that 5,556 square feet. All right, so the budget would be calculated if it's 10, it has to be 10 or less locations, all right, 10 or less branches. So we get the benefit when we're adding up all the square footage. For the first three, we're going to use the actual square footage, all right, add those numbers up. But for the West Branch and the Bookmobile, because the Bookmobile qualifies as an eligible entity, all right? So we put in the square footage. Well, West Branch, our smaller branch, has 5,000 square feet. All right. So instead of using 22,500, we get the benefit of using 25,000 when we're adding all this up. All right. The biggie is the Bookmobile. Instead of $1,100 or $1,152, we get $25,000 put in our budget for that location. And then everything is added up. All right, so here just a little over the $195,000 is the Cat 2 budget. But then we get the benefit of it's up to you as the library system to decide where you need to buy equipment to be installed within those library branches. All right, so if you know you need the lion's share at the main library, then you can do that. You could spend your $195,000 solely for the main branch. All right, that's your call. All right, any questions there? So at the end of the afternoon, I'm going to show you in the portal where to go in and check the square footage. Because again, whether you're applying for Cat 2 or not, if you're going to be applying for the hotspots, since both of those basically look at square footage, your budget is based on the square footage, you'll want to make darn sure the square footage is correct, all right, in the portal. Now, when we talk about Cat 2 budgets, really important to understand, once you do the math, that's what we call a pre-discount budget. So when you do the math, all right, so in this case, all right, let's say it's about, 204,000, all right, 200, yeah, you see the number there, all right? So if you were to spend up to that amount, okay, let's say $204,500. If you were to spend up to that amount, all right, you look at your discount rate. So let's say it's 60%. That means you're going to get back 60% of that $204,500. Bottom line, you're never going to receive that full amount. All right. We use that as a pre-discount budget, and then you're going to get back whatever your discount rate is, right? If you spend up to the max there. All right. So in this case, I made that comment, you have to pay your non-discount portion. All right. So in this case, if this library system spent up to that max, all right, then they're going to have to show that they covered 40% of that cost. All right. So again, please let me know if you have any questions there. Now, there's a couple of places where, if you're not sure, has any previous, Cat 2 funds been used? What's left of my budget? There's a couple of places you can go to check that. One that USAC recommends is their what they call open data. All right. And so again, you can just go to the PDF to get this URL. And then once you're in there, the hardest part about this, you need to know what that billed entity number is. And if you don't know what that is, reach out to either me or Christine and we can look that up for you. All right. So again, that's the toughest part here is knowing what that number is. But we plug in the billed entity number. And then it's going to say, okay, for this library, their combined square footage is just a little over 45,000 square feet. Here's, based on $4.50, here's their budget, $275,000. Here's the amount that's been funded to date. Here's the remaining amount that's available. All right, so again, this is one of the tools that you can use. All right, any questions on Cat 2? I know it's a lot of information, even though this is, beginner's training. All right, it's a lot of information. All right, so let's talk about the application process. And don't panic when you see this list, okay? This is definitely doable. All right, so we always start with step one. All right, we basically assess our needs and create our plan. All right, so do I have a current let's say contract for my bandwidth, and when is it set to expire? If it's set to expire this coming June 30th, okay, and then I need to be prepared to go out to bid for that. All right, so again, do I want to apply for category 2 or these hotspots? We start that process now. This is also that time of year when we go in and we want to make sure to update our profiles in the portal. All right, are the users current? Do I need to correct or create a new user account for someone? All right, updating square footage. Again, that's very important. We do that between now until about mid-January. All right, then we look at step 4, bid evaluation. All right, oh, excuse me, let me back up. Step 3, all right, bidding the new service. We do that starting about now until January. The deadline is typically about the 3rd week in February. You don't want to wait that long. All right, you want to make sure you have ample time to evaluate the bids and choose a vendor, right, and not miss any of those deadlines. So these are the general timeframes or suggested timeframes. All right, so now until about the end of January, all right, we file those Form 470s to ask for new services or like I said, contracts that are coming up for renewal. January, February timeframe, we start the bid evaluation. Okay, and then all right, then we go to signing contracts, right? Saying, yep, this is the vendor we've chosen. Okay, signing off on those contracts. Yeah, and Oberlin support, most definitely. Don's comment was, if you have a contract that's going to expire before January 2026, most contracts will follow that July 1 through June 30th timeframe, but not always. So if your contract is set to expire anytime between January 1st and June 30th, you need to go back out to bid. Okay. So again, very, very important so that you're not, that you're not going to get the full year covered. And Don, was there anything else you wanted to add there? Don or Christine? Yeah, sometimes, when we file, the understanding is that we're filing for services that will begin July 1. But if they go ahead and they start the service early, maybe they go ahead and light it and they start it in May or early June, and then they'll show that that's the basically service start date. So once you get to the end of the contract, you think it's going to go until June 30th and find out, well, no, it really ends a month early. Yeah, so it can be sneaky sometimes. So you want to verify, when is that contract set to expire? All right, so again, number of steps here. We go through the bid evaluation, we file the bidding form if needed, we do the bid evaluation, and then we file what's called the Form 471. That's the form, I call it the Mac Daddy of all the forms. This is the form where you're indicating what you're buying, who you're buying from, the cost, all of that detail. All right. That application, when you file it, it goes through review, and then happy day, you receive the funding letter. And I'll explain what the FCDL, what that means. All right. Once you get the funding letter, then we say, yep, we want to go ahead and we're declaring that, yep, we're moving forward with the service. This is also when we declare whether we're SEPA compliant or not. All right. We file what's called the Form 486. We actually receive the service, we pay the vendor, and then we file for reimbursement. Either we file for reimbursement or the vendor files or the service provider files for reimbursement. We'll talk about how that all works. Okay, so I mentioned assess the needs, start planning. Okay, so again, we do that between now, December, January timeframe. Go back, check those contracts. If you're looking at category 2 or the hotspots, all right, determine those needs. I mentioned about updating the portal. All right, so some of this information, we do this during, USAC calls it the admin window. It's a period of time when they have the portal open, all right, where we can go in and change information ourselves, like our square footage. This is the time when schools go in and they update their enrollment and their lunch counts, those National School Lunch Program counts. All right, So again, we do that during that admin window. Once that admin window closes, it's usually about mid-January, then it basically cuts off our ability to change some of that information ourselves. All right. Don't panic if you don't get something updated. There's some workarounds. All right. But we typically try to do that during the admin window. This is also, you want to go in and make sure that all of your entities are listed. I mentioned make sure that all your branches are there. All right. So again, do that, that update. Okay, so then posting that form 470. Now, this is the only form, let's say you're already in a 5-year contract for your bandwidth, for your branches, and that contract's not set to expire until June 30th, 2027. All right, so that means that you're already under contract for this upcoming 25 funding year, July 1 through June 30th, 2026. So you don't have to file the bidding form for that service. This is the only E-rate form where we get some relief in having to file. All the other forms that I'll be mentioning, the 471, the 486, those have to be filed on an annual basis. If you want E-rate, you have to file those every year. 470 is the only one that we're off the hook, you know, if there's no new service that we're asking for. But keep in mind, if you're asking for anything under category 2 for this upcoming year, or the hotspots, right, for the patrons, you'll need to be prepared to file that 470. All right. Now, we will be doing separate training on the 470 to kind of walk you through what's it going to look like to file a category 1 470. And then we're also going to look at filing a category 2. All right. So, we'll talk about some best practices and, what are the correct things to select on those forms. So we're not going to get into that today. All right. But just keep in mind that on a 470, if you need both category 1 and category 2, you can put all of that on the same form. All right. But again, we will be covering that in separate training. Now, the last note here, and Don or Christine, if you want to speak to this, if Oakland is doing another, what we call an omnibus form 470 for circuits, okay, then if they're going to go out to bid for that, same thing with the hotspots. I know they're in talks with some of the cellular providers. If Oakland goes out to bid for some of those circuits or those hotspots on your behalf, all right, then you're off the hook again. You don't have to file the 470. You still file the 471, but you can point back to Oakland's 470. Christine, will you speak to that?
So yeah, with regard to just regular category 1 branch services, the we're actually doing the branch services a little bit different. Yes, no omnibus for branches, as Don's masquerading as Oakland support today. So in the chat, you see the link for the managed branch connection service that we're doing instead. We found that there were just even with streamlining things, we found it was going to be easier, and most libraries really appreciated the offer for us to take it all soup to nuts, do the 470, 471, work with the vendors, and even if you decide to connect to the core monitor circuit. So yeah, there's that. But Lori did mention a consortia 470 that we are going to be doing for hotspots. And we have been talking to vendors. We're going to be talking to a few more vendors about that. As Lori mentioned, there's still some rules that need to be sorted out with the hotspot stuff. So if you're here today because you're thinking of hotspot service and E-rate funding for hotspot services, keep listening and keep a pin in this concept, because we're gonna be taking some of that work off of your plate by doing a consortia bid out for hotspot services that you'll be able to reference when you actually select services and apply for discounts on those hotspots. All right, thanks, Lori, for the opportunity there, and thanks for everything you've shared so far. So back to you.
Thank you for jumping in there. I appreciate it. Yeah, so if if that is able to work out, especially with the hotspots, then we'll plan our training around that. All right, to make sure you understand how to reference the Oakland 470 when you go to file your 471. All right, so don't get bogged down in that at this point. Okay, so we talked about when you must file a 470. All right, so if maybe you already have a month-to-month service where there's no contract, but the cost is greater than that $3,600 annually, so you don't qualify for that CABIO. All right, so again, you need to be prepared. That's something that we've had to do, say, with hotspots for bookmobiles, where those typically aren't under contracts. So every year, if a library wanted a hotspot for their kiosk or bookmobile, had to file a 470 every year. All right, and then justify this is why we're going to stay with, say, with our company, our current company, or this is why we're making changes. All right, that you had to go through that bidding process there. So again, just make sure, do we need to file that 470? All right, and I think we've already talked about most of this. Now, bandwidth upgrades, I do want to point out that if you're upgrading service mid-contract, it depends on the service provider. Some service providers will say, nope, you can't, you cannot do an upgrade. You're in the middle of a contract with us. You cannot do an upgrade. You would need to get with the service provider. Will they allow you basically to get out of the contract, go out to bid again? I don't want to get this too messy, all right? But, to be able to do the upgrade. Have the conversation either with Oakland, because Oakland may have that information depending on the circuits you have, right? But, does that provider allow you to do an upgrade during the term of your contract without making you go back out to bid again, right? So again, just some things to keep in mind there. Now, some contracts, I see this more on the school side than I do the library side, but some contracts may have language in them saying at the end of the initial term, we will allow you, say, to extend it another year, or maybe, 2 one-year extensions. If your contract has language to that effect, then you can basically put something in writing to the vendor to say, yep, I'm going to use that, what we call a voluntary extension. All right. So that again gives you some relief. You don't have to, you don't have to go out to bid again. All right. So again, just keep that in mind. Like I said, I see that more on the school side than I do the library side. Okay, so we've talked about some of the dates. We don't have the actual deadlines yet. We have to wait each year for the FCC to announce those, but they have told us that it should be close to what we saw, for this last filing season. Where the deadline to file, basically, let me go ahead a step. We wait till we find out what's the deadline to file the 471. So like last year, it was right at the end of March. We count back 29 days to determine the 470 deadline. All right, because remember, when you file a 470, it has to be out there for that minimum of 28 days. So on the 29th day, you can start evaluating bids and choosing a vendor. So once we know the 471 deadline, then we know once we know the 471 deadline, then we know the 470. All right. But like I said, the FCC has not made the formal announcement yet, but it should be close to what we had last year. So in that case, it was like March 25th. That would make February 25th, the 470 deadline. Don't wait that long. I've seen both schools and library applicants wait until right up on the deadline. Well, if you wait and file on the 470 deadline, then that means you're right up on the 471 deadline, evaluating the bids, choosing a vendor, signing a contract, and then trying to jump online to file the 471. It's a bit nerve-wracking. Been there, done that. All right, you want to avoid it if at all possible. Now, I keep pointing you to this resource library. Like I said, we're going to be doing separate 470 training for Cat 1 and Cat 2. And then we'll do training for 471. So, once we get those training materials updated, you can go out to that resource library. All right, I've got a number of documents out there. You're more than welcome to use. Now on the 470, the 470 itself acts as a request for proposal, but you may have some other formal document you want to attach you're welcome to do that. Any document that you attach is called an RFP. All right. But again, any of that additional documentation, you can list that or attach that to your form. Vendors cannot help you, they cannot provide the RFP language. That's a bidding violation. All right. And it's also important to know that, let's say you put a 470 out there and you attach a document. Maybe it's a spreadsheet that says, okay, for access points, we're looking at a minimum of 50. We're looking for some switches. We're looking for, license. If you go back during that, if it's during that 28-day bidding period, if you make a change, say to those quantities, you increase it, keep in mind, if you make, that's considered a cardinal change, all right? You're changing, the services that you're asking for, that restarts your 28-day waiting period. So you just want to be careful doing, be mindful of that if you do have to make a change. Now, we are allowed when we do that bidding form, and again, we'll get into more detail about this when we do the 470 training. All right, you cannot say specifically, I want this specific make and model. You can say, I want this specific make and model or equivalent. That's how, the FCC says we keep this, fair and open. So it's fair to, to all companies to bid. All right, but you can put disqualification factors, criteria on the 470. All right. You can say it has to be, a local vendor or within, say a 60-mile radius. There's some things that you could put on that 470. All right. And again, when we do the 470 training, we'll get more into that. So during that 28 days, you have to evaluate all bids that come in. All right. So again, you basically wait until after that 28 days to then start doing that evaluation. Again, we've already talked about all of this with the 28 days. All right, so after that due date, all right, so basically on that 29th day, we create a bid matrix, really important, where price has to be the highest weighted factor. Okay, so again, that's been the E-rate rule forever. All right, so price has to be the highest weighted factor, but it doesn't mean you have to necessarily go with the cheapest bid. So that's where it's important, to look at some of those other factors. What's the quality of the proposal? You can state that, they have to give you, say 3 references. There are some things that you can look at, right? So that you don't have to go with, with just the cheapest bid. And give me a second here. Okay, just making sure there were no questions there in the chat. But it is important, though, that you set up that bid matrix, that you're prepared to do that, because it is something that you have to keep in your files. Now, sometimes, depending on the type service that you're asking for or the quantity, you may not receive any bids. You can reach out to vendors to say, hey, I posted this 470, would you please respond? All right. You can say, I'm going to continue with my existing, maybe it's your local, ISP. We're going to continue with, with the service we currently have. We have current bills. We know what the service cost. All right. So E-rate does not require that you receive a certain number of bids. Now, you can reach out to other, to vendors to say, please bid. Make sure, it's not your brother-in-law, that kind of thing. Right. You want to obey all the rules. Okay. Prices, again, is it cost effective? You can go out and check, other marketplace options, go out to other, whether it's like CDWG or some online company, where you can compare prices. Now, bid evaluation, again, I'll get more into this when we do the 470 training, but I do have a bid evaluation sample out on my resource page. All right, again, we'll get into more into this when we do the 470 training. So once we do all of that evaluation, I mentioned this is then when we do the vendor selection. All right. So again, after that 28 days, the bid evaluation. All right. And then you sign off on those contracts. Even if it's, let's say, a quote for some hardware where it's just a quote. All right. There are no contract terms. For E-rate purposes, we still call that a contract. All right. Because, once you sign and date it, before we file the 471, then you would go into the portal and upload that signed document. Because the reviewers are going to make sure, first off, did you sign and date this before you filed the 471 application? You have to show you made that decision before filing that 471. It could just be writing, say a letter saying that, yep, the board accepted this. All right. But again, those signed documents need to be in the portal prior to filing the 471 application. And I apologize, we won't get into we'll do this when we do the 471, walking you through how to do this. So the reason, though, I will back up 1 second here. So there is this portal functionality. It's called the contract module, where we upload those contracts. Another reason that it's important to do this, to have this uploaded before we file the 471, when we go through the form, it's going to ask, okay, well, how are you purchasing this service? Contract, tariff to month to month. Well, if you're buying hardware, or let's say it's a 5-year contract, well, that's not month to month. I'm locked into a contract. You have to click on the contract button. Well, then it's going to say, okay, we'll point to your contract document. So again, that's why we have to do it ahead of time. So I mentioned the 471. This is the form that we file annually. Like I said, it doesn't matter if this upcoming year is year 3 of a 5-year contract. All right, we have to file this 471 every single year. But this is where it's going to ask you. You basically say, well, here's the company we're buying from. All right, we refer to that as the service provider. Here's the type of service, the cost, all of that kind of detail. All right, and let's say you have a funding request, let's say with your local ISP for internet, for bandwidth for your branches. And then let's say you do the hotspots, all right, for patrons, from, your cellular provider. All right, 2 different companies, 2 different type services. That's 2 different, what we call funding requests. All right, not a big deal. On the same 471 application, you can list both of those funding requests. The only requirement is that if you are applying for both category 1 and category 2 items, in that case, we have to split those and put those on 2 separate 471s. Now, again, we don't have the firm date yet for the window, but it should, we refer to the 471 filing period as the window. All right. So that should open about, early mid-January until latter March. It's usually open about 45 days. All 471s go into a review process. All right. They're going to look at, okay, you added a new branch library. They're going to reach out to Christine, me or Christine, and say, okay, right, give us a validation letter that this branch really is a branch library in your state. If you go in and you update square footage, they're going to come back and say, okay, we need some validation that this really is the correct square footage. So again, those are the kinds of things that they're going to verify. They're going to look at that contract you uploaded. What's the contract term? What's the monthly cost? So all 471s go through a review process, and it's referred to as PIA, Program Integrity Assurance. Now, when you get those inquiries, you'll get an email letting you know that there's a question out in the portal. We're given 15 days to respond to the questions. Now, if you do need more time within the portal, you can ask for another 7-day, a 1-week extension. They're usually very good about working with you, if you need additional time. So your application goes through that review process, and then we watch for what's called the FCDL, the Funding Commitment Decision Letter. All right, now those typically go out on a weekly basis. Don't think that's going to change. All right, but again, you want to watch for those. All right, really important. You'll get an email saying, oh, your FCDL has been issued, and it will have 2 documents attached. One is a PDF. Basically showing, it's a nice pretty document showing this is what you asked for, this is what was approved. If something was not approved or if the amount was reduced, it's going to tell you why. If something was denied or reduced, really important to check that letter over ASAP when you receive it, okay? Because if something was reduced or denied, you have 60 days from the date of that letter to file an appeal. All right, so again, just keep that in mind. All right, so once we get the funding letter, then I mentioned this Form 486, This is known as the receipt of services form. This is where you indicate that, yep, I said back in January or February, I'm going to go with this contract starting July 1. So they're just coming back saying, okay, well, are you still intending to start that service? All right. So again, that's one of the main purposes of this form. And the deadline for that, we'll talk again when we do 471 training, because then it's a little more relevant. But it's 120 days from the date of your funding letter. For most of us, most funding letters, if they come out before July 1 is your countdown date. All right. So it's 120 days from the date of the letter. For most of us, the deadline is typically October 29th. But I also mentioned that's also where we're indicating our SEPA compliance. All right, we've already talked a lot about the the time frame. All right, that 18 months. All right, for category 2. All right, don't confuse the Cat 1 and Cat 2 those timelines. Oh, sorry, I went backwards, I believe. Sorry, I bumped my mouse here. I apologize. Sorry about that. All right. I did mention about the document retention, that it is 10 years, and it's 10 years from the last date to receive service. All right. So if you file a 470 this year for a new contract, let's say it's a 5-year contract, all right, it's basically you have to keep all of the bids, the winning and losing bids, the bid matrix, copies of the those signed contracts, all of those documents. All right, for 10 years. All right. So again, 10-year document retention policy. So paying for the services. So we've gone through all of these applications, but how do we actually receive the reimbursement? All right. Well, there's one of 2 ways of doing that. One is discounts on your bill. Here, the vendor would then invoice USAC, all right, for the reimbursement. So let's say your discount rate is 80%. The service provider would bill you for the 20%. Then they would file the necessary forms to say, okay, USAC, reimburse me that remaining 80%. The other option is where if you pay the bill in full, you go ahead and pay for all 12 months worth of service, or if it's for equipment, let's say some access points, you pay the invoice in full. Then it falls on you as the applicant to file the necessary forms to say, okay, we've received the service, I paid the invoice, now reimburse us. All right. So again, it's up to you which one you choose. Now, if you do want what we call the discounted bill, you need to contact your service provider and let them know that's your preference. You can even put that on the 470 just to let vendors know up front before they ever even bid that you expect to get discounted bills. All right. So again, if you really are adamant about that, put it on the 470. All right. So again, let the vendors know that that's your preference. And you will let them know that as soon as possible. Now, some service providers will have some additional form. I know I've seen that from some of the, Spectrum, AT&T, some of the telecom companies. Same thing with the cellular providers. Well, they'll have an additional form they want you to sign off on saying, yep, I want discounted bills. All right. But again, that's up to that company, all right, to notify you and ask for that form. All right, so the form, if you're going to pay for the bills in full, then it falls on the applicant to file what's called the BEAR form. It's the Billed Entity Applicant Reimbursement Form. All right, so again, like I said, this falls on the applicant to file. And here, the deadline to file, it's 120 days from the last date to receive service. So the 2024 funding year ended June 30th for our recurring service. So 120 days from June 30th is October 28th. So one of the things with E-rate, it's typical to be dealing with up to 3 funding years at any given time. So you may still have to file a BEAR form for reimbursement for the 2023 funding year. All right, here we are in the middle of, or just about in the middle of the 2024 funding year, as we're starting the process to file for 2025. So again, typical to be dealing with up to 3 years. All right, so just remember that 120 days from the last date to receive service is the deadline to file for that reimbursement. Now, in the portal, there is a place where you can ask for an extension, and it would give you an additional 120 days. Let me know if you go back and you realize that there's, something else that needs to be, that reimbursement hasn't been filed yet. All right, and I can walk you through getting that extension. Now, with the BEAR form, most of us already have this additional E-rate form called the Form 498. This is where we provide banking information to USAC because everything is sent through basically an ACH transfer. All right, so you want to make sure that that 498 is current. We don't have to touch that form unless, let's say, you change banks. All right, then you would need to go in and make sure that the correct banking information is listed on that form. All right, so if you have changed banks recently, again, let me know and I can walk you through how to update that form. So I mentioned this other means of getting the funds where you get the discounted bill. So if you are, if you've reached out to the service provider and they're only billing you what we call that non-discount portion, all right, then it falls on the service provider to file what's called a SPI, a service provider invoice. All right, so again, that will fall on them to do that. They cannot file that SPI until you received a funding letter and you filed the 486. All right, so those are a couple of requirements there. Now, this is a site that I share each year. It's a good, quick way, again, kind of like that open data. The hardest part is you got to know your billed entity number. All right, but e-ratecentral.com, it's a really good site. You can get the same information in the E-rate portal, but the E-rate portal will only show you 1 year's of information at a time. Whereas with this site, you see all of your E-rate funding history back to the beginning of the program. All right, so if you go to the e-ratecentral.com site, you're going to see a gray box there where it'll say funding history search, enter BIN. All right, service providers can also use this. So you put in that billed entity number. So when you do that and you click on the little green pointer, then it's going to come back and show you a summary chart broken down by funding year. So you can see here in this first column, if you can see my mouse moving there, for 2024, all right, our current funding year. I can see that there were 5 different funding requests listed on the 471s. All 5 were funded and all 5 were listed on a Form 486. So that means they're up to date as much as they can do for right now. All right, I can also look across to say, okay, here's the amount of funding that was requested. First, it says, here's the total amount that was requested. Then they break it down between category 1 and category 2, and then how much was actually committed. So during review, we can see that, the total amount was just under 41,000. All right, but they were funded for just shy of 40,000. So during review, about $1,000 was considered ineligible. For whatever reason, that small portion was not funded. All right, so again, it's just a good site to see where you're at. I talked about, the disbursement, all right, getting reimbursed for the previous funding year. Another important thing to look at is look at 2023, because that ended June 30th, 2024. All right, so when I look across, it's going to show me, okay, here's the amount that was committed. This is how much was actually funded. All right, so we can see the $38,649.75, and we can see that the bulk of that, all but $644, has been dispersed. Sometimes, it's typical not to get 100% dispersed because maybe, you put down, $500 a month for your bandwidth, and maybe something happened 1 month where they didn't bill you, or you wound up with a credit. All right, when we get reimbursed, we're reimbursed on what we actually paid. All right, but again, very important, because if you're looking at these numbers and under remaining, under total dispersed, if it says 0, that means you need to be prepared to file the reimbursement forms for 2023. All right, I get calls all the time saying, is there something I still need to do? I immediately go to this site because, again, it shows me multiple years. All right, but again, it's a good resource to use. Let me know if you have any questions there. Okay, last thing we're going to look at here in our last 15 minutes or so, I just want to show you real quick the portal, if you've never been into this before, because again, very important. If you're going to apply for category 1, hotspots, or if you're going to apply for anything under category 2, you need to make sure that your square footage has been updated. All right. So when we go to usac.org, all right, /e-rate, in the upper right hand corner, you'll see the option to sign in. When you click there, if you've not logged in a while, your password will expire after about 45 days. So if you've not been in a while, you will have to click on forgot password. You put in your email address, they'll send you an email, you reset it, just like, any other, forgot password process. Now, this does use multi-factor authentication, so it will send you an email or a text, all right, with a 6-digit code. Every time you go to log in, it's not going to save those codes, all right? But once you go to log in, it's going to initially take you to this dashboard. And right now, it's kind of confusing because it looks like just 2 informational paragraphs. They're actually menu options. All right. So we'll see, here's the first one listed is the the E-Rate Productivity Center, EPIC. Right below that is the Emergency Connectivity Fund. All right. So all things E-Rate, you're going to click on this first option. But like I said, it is really a menu option. Now, one thing I do want to show you, it's how do I know if I'm the account administrator, or, in my secondary, user account. If you look in the upper right-hand corner, when you click on E-Rate Productivity Center, that takes you to what's called the landing page. All right. If you look up, there's a grouping, we call these shortcuts. If you see something that says manage users, you are the admin. All right. Because only the admin has that option. If it just says manage organization and manage users is missing, that means you're obviously a user in the portal, but you don't have that admin designation. So you can't add new users or change rights. Again, just to let you know, because that's a common question that I get. Okay, so square footage. On the landing page, if you scroll down, you'll see a section that says My Entities. If you are a library system, all right, the bin for the library system is listed first. The build entity is always listed first. All right, so if you click on, so in this case, the ABC library system, if I click there, all right, at the bottom of the page, it's going to show me here's the sum of square footage for all the libraries in the system. All right, so I can see when I look back under my entities, I see that I have 3 different branches, the ABC main branch, the South branch, and the North branch. So this is that cumulative total of the square footage for all of those sites. All right. Now, I also want to point out another thing that you can get from that summary page when you click on the build entity. Up at the top of the page, you're going to see some menu options. You will see category 2 budget. This is another place you can go to find out, have you used any of your Cat 2 budget since 2021, the start of this current 5-year budget cycle? And if so, how much money do you have left? All right. So from the menu option, you can click on category 2 budget, and then you'll see the option to get the budget. And then it's going to show you, here's your budget. Here's how much you've used to date. Here's how much you have left. All right. But all of that is under when you click on the build entity, the first one in that list. So if you look at, that, okay, here's the cumulative square footage, and you look at that and you think, okay, well, that number's not right. Maybe you've had some, you've expanded some of your buildings, all right, or maybe there's some of your branches where the square footage hasn't been updated, all right, or hasn't been provided, I should say, all right. So you do this one library at a time, all right. So you would go to each of your library sites, click on the name of that library. So here I'll click on main library. When I do that, it's going to say, okay, here's the summary information. Here's the name of that building. Here's the street address, right? But if I come over in the upper right-hand corner, I'll see the option to manage organization. I'll click there, and then you get this really long page, all right? So if you see that the street address is incorrect, you can go ahead and update, correct that street address, all right? But you just keep scrolling down. Like I said, it's just a really long screen. All right, but when we get down toward the bottom, you're going to see a section that says square footage. All right, so make sure update that number there. If it's the main library, you'll also see that this is where the school district, where the main branch is located. Again, the school district should already be associated. All right, so again, just go in, you can update that field there, and then just click on submit. Just make sure though that you do that for each of the libraries in the list. All right, you have to do that one at a time. So that's the biggie that you need to do right now. All right, any questions there? I know I've thrown a lot at you, even though it's, like I said, it's beginner's training.
Lori, I am not seeing anything in the chat.
Okay.
The good news is that Lori is always like super, super wonderful at answering questions as they come up. And when she puts this contact slide up here, she means it. And honestly, the cell phone is just as accessible as anything else, and sometimes the best way to reach her. And we really appreciate all that you do for the libraries in Ohio, Lori, and all the information you shared with us today. It is a lot. It is a lot, and I will tell you, this is my fourth time around. 3 full years of doing E-rate. And I'm nodding and smiling today because I've done 3 full years of E-rate, even with these changes. So you too can get to the point of feeling comfortable, but it takes a minute and it takes a lot of questions. So feel free to ask those questions and don't feel bad about asking those questions. That's how we all learn.
No. In fact, I received several calls today. The first thing the person said, I know this is a silly question. There are no silly questions, right? So no, please don't hesitate.
Okay. Well, I think, Lori, we might just stop the recording then here and call it a day. Thank you again so much, Lori, for your information, your presentation today. And thank you, everybody, for sticking around. It was a long afternoon, but a very full afternoon, and we appreciate all of that. Okay? All right.
Perfect. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.